The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1875, but Rose O'Malley didn't flinch. At 26, she'd grown accustomed to the sound, though it still sent a chill down her spine, especially with her children waiting at home. The saloon brawl had spilled into the street again, and Rose quickened her pace, clutching her basket of supplies closer to her chest. The general store owner had extended her credit once more, but she knew such kindness couldn't last forever. "Madam, you might want to step aside," a deep voice warned as a man on horseback approached from behind. Rose moved to the boardwalk, watching as the stranger rode past. Unlike the usual drifters, this man sat tall in his saddle, his posture speaking of confidence rather than the desperation that drove most men to these parts. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather duster, and his hat, a fine Stetson despite the trail dust, shadowed eyes that briefly met hers. She noticed how his gaze lingered, not in the predatory way she'd grown to recognize and fear since William's passing, but with a gentle curiosity that made her cheeks warm despite herself. It had been 3 years since she'd felt anything but worry and exhaustion. The stranger tipped his hat and continued toward the livery stable. Rose shook away the distraction and hurried home. Her little cabin sat on the outskirts of town, far enough to avoid trouble but close enough that her laundry business could sustain them. Barely. When she reached her modest home, her eldest, 8-year-old James, was standing watch on the porch, a habit he'd developed since his father died. "Mama, did you get the medicine for Emma?" His small face was pinched with worry beyond his years. "I did, sweetheart," Rose assured him, climbing the steps. Inside, 3 more children waited, 6-year-old twins Sarah and Samuel, and 4-year-old Emma, whose fever had kept Rose awake for 3 nights straight. Emma lay on a small cot near the fireplace, her cheeks flushed with fever. Rose knelt beside her, brushing back damp blonde curls so like her own. "I've got your medicine, little bird," she murmured, uncorking the bottle Dr. Patterson had prepared. The cost had been dear, the last of the money she'd been saving for winter supplies, but Emma's rattling cough left no choice. After administering the medicine and settling the children with a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Rose sat at her small table, tallying figures by lamplight. The arithmetic was unyielding. Without more income, they wouldn't make it through winter. Morning came too quickly. Rose had barely slept when the rooster crowed, announcing another day of struggle. Emma's fever had broken sometime in the night, but Rose knew from experience that recovery would be slow. She needed help with the washing today. The Hendersons had brought their entire season's worth of linens, and they paid well enough to justify hiring assistants. "James, I need you to mind your brothers and sisters," she instructed as she prepared to leave. "I'll be back by midday with lunch." "Yes, Mama," he replied, his solemn nod a reminder of how quickly he'd been forced to grow up. At the wash house, a lean-to built alongside the creek that ran behind their cabin, Rose was surprised to find the stranger from yesterday watering his horse. "Madam," he greeted, removing his hat. In the morning light, she could see his features clearly, a strong jawline softened by kind eyes the color of summer skies, and hair the rich brown of freshly turned soil. "Hope I'm not trespassing. Your creek has the sweetest water in the territory." "It's not my creek," Rose replied, setting down her laundry basket, "though I'd appreciate if your horse doesn't muddy it upstream of my washing." The man smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Wouldn't dream of it. Ethan Northrop, madam." He extended his hand. "Rose O'Malley," she replied, briefly accepting his handshake. His palm was calloused but warm. "Are you passing through or staying in Willow Creek?" "Depends on what I find here," he answered cryptically. "I'm looking to settle somewhere, been on the trail long enough." Rose nodded, though she couldn't imagine why anyone would choose Willow Creek. The silver mine had played out years ago, leaving the town struggling for survival. "Well, Mr. Northrop, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned to her washing, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, he tied his horse to a nearby tree and approached. "You've got quite a load there. Mind if I lend a hand?" Rose paused, suspicious. "And what would you want in return?" His expression sobered. "Nothing improper, Mrs. O'Malley, just offering help to a neighbor." "We're hardly neighbors." "Could be. I'm looking at that abandoned Hayes property up the road." Rose knew the place, a decent-sized homestead with good soil, abandoned after old man Hayes died last winter. His children back east had no interest in frontier life. "That place needs a lot of work," she observed. "I'm not afraid of work," Ethan replied simply. "Now, what can I do to help with this washing?" Against her better judgment, Rose directed him to fetch more water and stoke the fire under the large copper tub. To her surprise, he worked diligently and without complaint, even when she asked him to help wring out the heavy linens. His strength made quick work of tasks that would have left her arms aching for days. By midday, they'd finished what would normally have taken her until sunset. Rose wiped her brow, embarrassed to be seen so disheveled but grateful for the assistance. "Thank you, Mr. Northrop. I don't know what prompted your kindness, but it's appreciated." "Ethan, please," he corrected with a smile, "and it was no hardship. I've been on my own too long. Feels good to be useful to someone besides myself." As they walked back toward her cabin, Rose grew anxious. She hadn't planned on introducing a stranger to her children, but she could hardly send him away without offering refreshment after his help. Her worries proved unnecessary. James approached cautiously at first, but when Ethan knelt to speak to him eye to eye, showing genuine interest in the boy's careful watch over his siblings, Rose saw her son's shoulders relax slightly. The twins were more forthcoming, especially Samuel, who was fascinated by Ethan's spurs and pocket watch. Little Emma, still weak from her illness, observed from the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt despite the warm day. Rose prepared a simple lunch of leftover cornbread and fresh buttermilk. When she apologized for the modest offering, Ethan shook his head. "After months of my own cooking, this is a feast," he assured her, accepting the plate with thanks. As they ate on the porch, Emma ventured closer, finally settling beside Ethan and examining the turquoise stone set into his belt buckle with curious fingers. "That's pretty," she whispered, her voice still raspy. "It's Navajo work," Ethan explained. "A gift from a friend who taught me to track when I was scouting for the Army." "You were a scout?" James asked, his interest piqued. "For a few years after the war. Didn't much care for Army life, but I learned plenty that served me well since." Rose watched as her children gravitated toward the stranger, their natural caution giving way to curiosity. It had been so long since they'd had a man's presence in their lives. William had been gone since before Emma could remember him. After lunch, Ethan thanked her and prepared to leave. "I'll be looking over that Hayes property. If it suits, you might be seeing more of me, Mrs. O'Malley." "Rose," she corrected, surprising herself. His smile warmed his entire face. "Rose," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "It suits you." In the days that followed, Ethan became a regular visitor. He purchased the Hayes property for a reasonable sum from the banker, who was glad to have the taxes paid. Each evening, after working on repairs to the old homestead, he would stop by Rose's cabin, sometimes bringing small gifts, a rabbit for the stew pot, fresh berries he'd found while clearing fence lines, or little whittled toys for the children. Rose found herself looking forward to his visits, though she tried to guard her heart. Willow Creek had seen its share of men who made promises only to disappear when winter set in, or prospects dimmed. 2 weeks after their first meeting, a thunderstorm rolled in unexpectedly. Rose was gathering laundry from the line when the first drops fell, quickly becoming a downpour. She raced to save the clean clothes, but the wind whipped them from her grasp. Suddenly, Ethan was beside her, his duster already soaked as he helped gather the remaining linens. They ran to the shelter of her porch, laughing despite the drenching. "You're soaked through," Rose observed, noticing how his shirt clung to his chest. "Worth it to hear you laugh," he replied, his gaze so earnest that Rose felt her breath catch. Inside, the children exclaimed over their bedraggled appearance. Rose sent Ethan to the washroom with a towel and one of William's old shirts she'd kept, though she wasn't sure why she'd offered it. Perhaps because the storm showed no signs of abating, and the thought of him riding back to his place in such weather troubled her. When he emerged, wearing William's faded blue shirt that fit his broader shoulders more snugly than it had her late husband, Rose felt a confusing mix of emotions. Guilt at finding another man attractive, wariness born of hard experience, and something else, a fluttering hope she hadn't felt in years. The storm raged through dinner, and by the time they'd finished, night had fallen. Wind rattled the windows, and Emma, still recovering from her illness, coughed fitfully. "You can't ride back in this," Rose said finally. "The creek will be over its banks by now." "I don't want to impose," Ethan began, but a particularly loud crack of thunder made them all jump. "You can sleep by the fire," she decided. "It's not much, but it's dry." That night, after the children were asleep, Rose sat in her rocking chair mending by the light of a single lamp. Ethan stretched out on a bedroll near the hearth, not pretending to sleep but watching her with thoughtful eyes. "May I ask about their father?" he said finally, Rose's hand stilled. "William died of pneumonia 3 winters ago. Emma was just a baby." She resumed her stitching, needing the familiar motion. "We came west from Boston after the war. William had dreams of making our fortune in silver, but the mine played out 6 months after we arrived. He took odd jobs after that, but the winter was harsh and he worked until he couldn't stand any more." Ethan was silent for a long moment. "You've managed admirably on your own." "Had no choice," Rose replied simply, "though I won't pretend it's been easy. And no family to help. My parents disowned me when I married William. He was beneath my station, according to them." She smiled sadly. "They were right about the hardship, but wrong about William. He was a good man and a loving father." "I'm sorry for your loss," Ethan said softly, "and theirs." Rose met his gaze. "What about you?" "No family, parents gone. One brother killed at Shiloh, the other's a banker in Chicago. We write occasionally, but we've little in common now." He shifted, resting his head on his arm. "I had a wife once in Texas, Sarah. She died in childbirth along with our son." "I'm so sorry," Rose whispered, understanding the shadow that crossed his face. "It was 8 years ago. For a long time after, I couldn't stay anywhere. Just kept moving, taking whatever work came my way, ranching, scouting, even mining for a spell in Colorado." He traced a pattern on the worn floorboards. "Never thought I'd want to settle again until I rode into Willow Creek." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, its implications warming Rose's cheeks. She busied herself with folding her mending. "It's late," she said finally. "We should get some rest." Morning brought clear skies and a changed landscape. The creek had indeed overflowed its banks, though it was already receding. Ethan helped Rose assess the damage a few fence posts down, her vegetable garden partially flooded but nothing catastrophic. "I can fix those posts before I head back," he offered. "You've done enough," Rose insisted. "I'm sure your own place needs attention after the storm." "My place can wait," he replied. Besides, James is a quick study with a hammer, could be a good lesson for him. Rose couldn't argue with that logic. Her son needed a man's guidance, and she'd seen how he watched Ethan's every move, absorbing his manner and methods. By midday, the fence was repaired, and Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow if that's all right," he said as he mounted his horse. "I've got some seedlings to plant. Thought the children might want to help." Rose nodded, wondering when his visits had become something she counted on rather than merely tolerated. "We'd like that." As summer progressed into early autumn, Ethan's presence became a fixture in their lives. He built proper beds for the children, repaired the leaky roof, and expanded Rose's vegetable garden. The Hayes property was taking shape too. He'd replaced the rotted porch, repaired the barn, and planted late-season crops that would help see him through winter. Rose found herself watching him with the children, noting his patience with Samuel's endless questions, his gentleness with Emma's fragile health, his understanding of James's need for responsibility, and his appreciation of Sarah's quiet creativity. He treated each child as an individual, never lumping them together as the little ones as many in town did. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, Ethan turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Rose, I need to ride to Billings tomorrow. Got word that a herd of cattle I purchased is being delivered." "Cattle?" Rose questioned, surprised. "I thought you were focusing on crops." "A small herd to start 20 head of good Hereford stock. The Hayes place has enough grazing land to support 3 times that number." He hesitated. "I've been planning this for some time. Just wanted to be sure this was where I wanted to put down roots before making that investment." "And you're sure now?" Rose asked, her heart beating faster. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm despite the evening chill. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, until Rose reluctantly pulled away. "How long will you be gone?" "A week, maybe less if the weather holds." His eyes searched hers. "Will you be all right?" "We managed before you came," she reminded him, though the thought of his absence left a hollow feeling in her chest. "I know you did," he said softly, "but I'm asking if you'll miss me." Rose looked down at her hands, then back at his expectant face. "Yes," she admitted, "we all will." Ethan's absence felt longer than the 5 days it actually lasted. The children asked for him constantly, and Rose found herself watching the road more often than she cared to admit. When he finally returned, driving a small herd of cattle with the help of 2 hired hands, the children ran to greet him, their excitement evident in their shouts and waving arms. Rose remained on the porch, determined to show more dignity, though her heart leapt at the sight of him. He looked tired but satisfied as he directed the hands to continue to his property while he stopped at the O'Malley cabin. "Brought something back for you all," he announced, reaching into his saddlebag. For the boys, there were carved wooden animals. For Sarah, a small doll with real yarn hair. For Emma, a picture book with colorful illustrations. And for Rose, a package wrapped in brown paper. "Open it later," he murmured when the children were distracted with their gifts. That night, after the children's excited chatter had given way to sleep, Rose unwrapped the package with trembling fingers. Inside lay a beautiful woolen shawl in deep blue with delicate embroidery around the edges. "It reminded me of your eyes," Ethan said, watching her from his usual place by the fire. They'd long since abandoned the pretense that he stayed late to avoid riding in the dark. "It's beautiful," Rose whispered, draping it around her shoulders. "Thank you." "There's something else," he said, moving to sit beside her. From his pocket he withdrew a small wooden box. "I had this made in Billings. Been carrying the stone for years, waiting for the right moment." Inside the box sat a ring, a simple silver band holding a turquoise stone similar to the one in his belt buckle. "I know it's not a diamond," he began, but Rose shook her head. "It's perfect," she assured him, though she made no move to take it. Ethan took a deep breath. "Rose O'Malley, I've traveled across this country searching for something I couldn't name. Now I know it was a home, not just a place, but people to fill it with meaning." He took her hand. "I love you, and I love those children as if they were my own. I want to build a life with all of you if you'll have me." Rose felt tears gathering. "Ethan, the children need stability. I can't risk their hearts on promises that might not last." "I understand your caution," he said, still holding her hand. "You've been carrying this family alone for too long, but I'm asking you to trust me, not blindly, but based on what you've seen of me these past months." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm not going anywhere, Rose, not unless you and those children are with me." Rose looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw the future she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine, one with partnership instead of solitary struggle, with love instead of mere survival. "The children adore you," she admitted. "And I them," he replied. "But it's your heart I'm asking for, Rose. The rest will follow in time." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. When William died, she'd walled off a part of herself, focusing solely on keeping her family alive and together. Ethan had somehow slipped past those defenses, showing her that love wasn't a luxury but a necessity as essential as the air she breathed. "Yes," she whispered finally, opening her eyes to see his face transformed by joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church on Willow Creek's Main Street. The entire town turned out, partly from curiosity and partly because Rose's laundry service had touched almost every household at some point. Emma, recovered from her illness and blooming with excitement, scattered wildflower petals before her mother. The twins, scrubbed clean and solemn with the importance of the occasion, stood beside James, who proudly carried the rings, Ethan's plain gold band matching Rose's turquoise one. As Reverend Hopkins pronounced them husband and wife, Rose felt the last of her reservations dissolve beneath Ethan's tender kiss. They were a family now, officially and completely. The following spring brought significant changes. Ethan's cattle thrived, and he added to his herd, establishing one of the most promising ranches in the territory. The Hayes farmhouse, now the Northrop ranch, had been expanded to accommodate their family, with individual rooms for the children and a spacious kitchen where Rose no longer had to count pennies for every meal. Rose's laundry business continued, though now it was by choice rather than necessity. She enjoyed the independence it provided and the connections it maintained with the townspeople. Ethan supported her work, even building her a proper washhouse with pumped water and multiple tubs. As summer approached, Rose found herself growing tired more easily, her dresses fitting more snugly around the waist. When she finally confided her suspicions to Ethan, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for: pure, unrestrained joy. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The children reacted to the news with varying degrees of excitement and concern. James, now 9, asked practical questions about where the baby would sleep. The twins peppered them with queries about how babies grew and when this one would arrive. Emma, at 5, was simply delighted at the prospect of no longer being the youngest. As Rose's pregnancy progressed, she marveled at the difference between this experience and her previous ones. With William, they'd struggled financially with each child, though they'd never regretted a single one. Now, with Ethan, there was abundant preparation: a beautiful cradle he crafted himself, soft blankets ordered from back east, a rocking chair positioned perfectly by the bedroom window. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the wide porch of their ranch house watching the children play in the yard, Rose felt the baby kick particularly forcefully. She guided Ethan's hand to the spot. "Strong one," he commented, his eyes crinkling with delight. "Like his father," Rose replied. "Or her mother," Ethan countered, leaning over to kiss her temple. They watched as James taught Samuel to throw a lasso, while Sarah collected wildflowers with Emma trailing behind. The scene was one of domestic contentment that Rose had once thought forever beyond her reach. "I never thought I'd have this again," Ethan said, echoing her thoughts. "After Sarah died, I convinced myself I didn't deserve another chance. And I was certain no man would want a widow with 4 children," Rose admitted. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Then we were both wrong, and thankfully so." As her due date approached, Rose found herself reflecting on their journey. The past year had transformed not just their circumstances but her heart as well. She'd learned to trust again, to believe in possibilities rather than just endure difficulties. Early one October morning, Rose awoke to the unmistakable pains of labor. Ethan sent James to fetch the midwife from town while he helped Rose prepare. The children were ushered to a neighbor's farm, though James insisted on staying close. Unlike her previous deliveries, this one progressed quickly. By midday, Rose held their son in her arms, a robust baby with a thatch of dark hair like his father's and eyes that promised to match the blue of Rose's own. "Edward William Northrop," she murmured, honoring both Ethan's father and her late husband in the name. Ethan, seated beside her on the bed, ran a gentle finger over the baby's soft cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both perfect." When the children returned that evening, they gathered around the bed to meet their new brother. James, ever the protector, asked serious questions about the baby's health. The twins wanted to know when he would be old enough to play. Emma, delighted with her new status as a big sister, insisted on helping with everything. As Rose watched Ethan introduce their son to each of his siblings, she felt a completeness she'd never known before. This blended family, forged through loss and found in unexpected love, was more than she dared to hope for after William's death. Later that night, with the children finally asleep and baby Edward nursing contentedly, Ethan sat beside her on their bed, his arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked, though her expression had already answered him. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning against him. "You've given us so much, Ethan." "You've given me more," he countered. "A family, purpose, love." He kissed the top of her head. "Remember that day last summer when I stopped by your wash house?" Rose smiled. "You claimed the creek had the sweetest water in the territory. It did, still does." His eyes twinkled. "Though I was more interested in the woman doing the washing than the water." "You were forward, offering help to a woman you didn't know," she teased. "Best decision I ever made." He gazed down at their son. "That evening, before I left, Emma asked me if I had little ones of my own." "Remember," Rose nodded, the memory vivid. I was mortified. I apologized for her boldness. "No need." Her question made me realize what I truly wanted. He stroked Edward's tiny hand with one finger. "When she said, 'I have 4 little ones,' and you looked so worried about my reaction, all I could think was that I'd make room for as many as you had, and more besides." "You're a good man, Ethan Northrop," Rose said softly. "The best I've known." As winter settled over the Montana territory, the Northrop ranch stood warm against the cold, its windows glowing with lamplight, its rooms filled with the sounds of family. The cattle huddled in well-built shelters, the pantry bulged with preserved foods, and the future stretched before them with promise. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Rose stood in the doorway of the main room, watching as Ethan read a story to all 5 children. James and the twins sat on the floor near his feet, while Emma perched on the arm of his chair, and baby Edward slept contentedly in his arms. The scene before her was everything she'd once thought lost forever: security, love, and the warm embrace of family. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan looked up and met her gaze, his smile conveying all they'd found in each other. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Northrop," he mouthed silently. "Merry Christmas," she returned, her heart full to bursting. Outside, the Montana winter might rage, but inside the Northrop home, love had built a fortress that no storm could breach. For Rose, who had once faced an uncertain future with 4 children depending solely on her, the journey from desperation to contentment seemed miraculous. And for Ethan, who had wandered for years seeking something unnamed, the discovery of this ready-made family, now expanded by one more, was the answer to prayers he'd almost stopped believing would be answered. As the years passed, the Northrop ranch prospered. 3 more children joined their family: twin girls, Grace and Hope, born 2 years after Edward, and finally another boy, Daniel, who arrived when Emma was 12. Their home expanded along with their family, but its heart remained the same: a place of acceptance, hard work, and abiding love. Rose never forgot those difficult years after William's death, when each day was a struggle for survival. They had shaped her into the woman she became: strong enough to stand alone when necessary, but wise enough to accept love when it appeared unexpectedly. And Ethan, once a solitary rider with nowhere to call home, found his greatest purpose in being husband to Rose and father to their children, all 9 of them, each one claiming an equal portion of his heart. In the wild expanse of the Montana Territory, they had built something rare and precious: a family bound not just by blood but by choice, and a love that had room enough for everyone.